Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells, and I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I am very excited to talk about one of my all-time favorite games, Fiasco. This is one that's been around for a few years. People talk about it all the time. Will Wheaton did a whole tabletop episode on it a few years ago. So you might already know about it, and if you do, then I hope that you love it as much as I do. If you've never heard about it, then today is your lucky day, because I'm going to introduce you to one of not only the most enjoyable role-playing games I've ever played, but in my opinion, one of the most perfectly designed games. Fiasco is, in brief, a single-session role-playing game that does not require a GM, in which a group of 3, 4, 5 players can play an entire story, start to finish, including character creation, in about 2 or 3 hours. And that story is kind of a Coen Brothers style thing. Small-time caper gone disastrously wrong. So if that sounds really fun to you, and it sounds really fun to me, then hold on to your hats, because we're going to get into it. So, I don't have a PDF. You're just going to be looking at my face. But Fiasco is, like I said, it is a GM-less game in which it's designed for single settings. And so you start by getting a bunch of dice, and you roll them out on the table. And these are all just plain old D6s. You're going to need them in 2 colors. And, depending on how many players you have, there's a specific number of dice you need, and that's all in the book explained. You will also pick a play set, and there are lots of different play sets. Kind of the standard one is, I think, called Suburbia or Small Town, something like that, which is just, here you are, you're the people in this town, and you're going to be doing some things. I am going to grab a copy of the book. So, this is my copy of the book, kind of worn at the edges. I have my name on a post-it because I take this to conventions all the time. This is like a perfect game to play at a con with some friends or with strangers that you've never met, because you can sit down with no prep and do the whole thing. So, let me show you, for example, Main Street. That's their kind of core playset in this starting book. So you roll out all those dice, right? And then you give everybody like a pen and a bunch of 3x5 cards, and you start doing. The game is played in 3 phases. The first one is creation, which is where you are creating the characters and the scenario collaboratively using the dice that you've just rolled onto the table. The second phase is the main play phase, where you're going to be taking turns doing scenes with each other. And then the third phase is called like the aftermath phase, which is important. It kind of feels like the main play phase should wrap up the story, and it sort of does, but that aftermath is key, and we're going to get into that later. So, each playset has 4 categories: relationships, objects, locations, and needs. Okay? And these are going to be defining all of the things. And so each player in turn has a chance to, you go around the table a few times, and you will take a die away. And so, for example, this is what the relationships page looks like. Okay? There are 6 categories, and each category has 6 things in it. And so when it's my turn first, I can establish a new relationship with a die, or I can define someone's relationship with a die. So if I, for example, take a die number 2, then I am establishing a work relationship. And I pick any 2 players, and I write down relationship work, and I stick it on a 3x5 card, and I put it in between those 2 players. So now their characters know each other through work. So, and I can put that next to myself, or I can put that between anyone who doesn't already have one. Every pair of players, who are seated next to each other, you are going to have a relationship with your person on your left and your person on your right. Okay? And then in the future, the next person can, further define that relationship with a different die, or they could just establish a new relationship somewhere else. There's no real guidance to this. And so if I take another, say, a 4, it says tradesman, mechanic, plumber, decorator, landscaper, etc. So somebody says, okay, you two characters know each other through the concept of, so are you both plumbers? Or maybe one of you hired the other one to, come work on some pipes in your house. And there you go. Needs are fascinating because these are what really drive the story. So, for example, here, number 5, to get the truth. And then the next person picks a die that says about what she did behind the patio. Who is she? What did she do behind the patio? You define all of that as you want. And in fact, what did she do behind the patio? You might not even know that at the start of the story. Things like locations. Here's number 3, out by the interstate at Chicken Hut, a fast food restaurant. Why is that an important location in your story? You don't know. You're just going around little bit by little bit establishing all of these things. Last of all is objects. Maybe your object is information over here, and that is a love letter. So 2 characters, someone wrote a love letter to somebody else, okay? Or maybe it is an untoward object, such as a porn stash, or a mink farm, or clan outfits and hate paraphernalia. Obviously, Fiasco is a game you need to play with the X card, and if something shows up that you don't like, then you get rid of it. But if someone in your group wants to play, as part of a hate group, and everyone else is excited about making sure that character has comeuppance, it's up to your group how that's going to play out. So, after you have gone around the table a few times, everyone is going to have 4 cards. I'm going to have 2 here between me and the character on my right, and 2 cards here between me and the character on my left. Every one of those pairs is going to have a relationship, and then the others are going to be some combination of needs, locations, and objects. And by the time you're done and you've defined all of those cards, you are going to have a pretty good idea of what that scenario is going to be like. Maybe there's, 2 characters standing next to each other, or their relationship is work, and it's a plumber thing. And then the other 2 characters, their relationship is, the guy who hired the plumber has a relationship with a spouse. And so then that person, the wife, and the person next to them, maybe those 2 women are having an affair with each other. However it is that you end up defining this, as you go, you'll say, oh, okay, I can see now where, how everything's connected, what kind of story we're going to be telling, and then how the needs that you've established are going to drive that story. And it comes up with this neat little kind of clockwork mechanism where all the characters are connected and where they kind of have a pretty clear sense of what they're trying to accomplish and how far they're willing to go to get it. And that's character creation and scenario creation. Takes maybe 30 or 40 minutes total, and it's a lot of fun to do, and it really sparks great story ideas. Next, you get to what is, that second phase, the play phase. And in the play phase, you push all those dice in the middle. Doesn't matter at this point what numbers on them. You just want to push them all in the middle. You've got the light dice and the dark dice. And what each person does in order, you'll follow the same order you did when you were establishing the scenario. You get to choose if you're going to establish a scene or resolve a scene. So if it's my turn and I choose to establish a scene, that means that I will do something like, well, I'm the plumber who, is trying to figure out what is really going on at this house, and I want to get paid because I've got a drug habit that I need to feed, and blah, 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 blah. And so maybe my scene is that I am going to purposefully break something in this house so that they need to hire me to fix it, and I can get a lot more money out of them. Now that's me establishing the scene, and I'll pick 1 or 2 other people who will be in the scene with me. And so maybe that's the guy who hired me and the wife. And so we will just kind of role play that little scene. And at any point, and there's no need to roll dice, there's no conflict resolution of any kind. What's going on is the other half is resolve, right? You establish and you resolve. So because I established the scene, then everybody else at the table resolves the scene. During our role play, during our little improvised conversation where I'm trying to convince them to hire me for a much bigger job, the other players at the table, everyone other than me, gets to choose how this ends. Do they actually hire me back, or do they realize that I'm trying to cheat them, and so they say no and they refuse and they kick me out of the house? If I get what I want out of the scene, they give me one of those light colored dice. And if I don't get what I want out of the scene, they give me a black colored dice. Now, you are trying to collect over the course of the game as many of one color as you can, because that's what's going to make your outcome good. Even if all of your dice are bad because everything went wrong, that still helps because all your dice are the same color. That's what you're going for. Now, if I choose to resolve a scene instead of establish a scene, that means that everyone else at the table says, well, how about we're going to do a scene with your drug dealer who is demanding more money, and he comes over to your house because you owe him, and he trashes things, and they come up with any scene they want that makes sense, right? And so then that scene, they'll even pick who's in it. So it would be me and maybe my drug dealer, and maybe that's it. So we have that little thing going on. And then I, because they established, I get to choose how this resolves. Do I want something good or do I want something bad? How does this scene end? And then every player at the table, one by one, chooses to establish or resolve a scene, and you go through it, and you'll go around the table twice. 2 rounds of the table is halfway, at which point you have something called the turn, and the turn is super neat, or the tilt. It's called the tilt. And the tilt, you will roll some more dice, and something will happen. And you can see none of those words are good, except, I guess, innocence. So, mayhem. A dangerous animal, perhaps metaphorical, gets loose. I love... Which one is it? Here, in failure. Something precious is on fire. That's a really nice one. So you'll go through, everyone does 2 scenes, and then you have a tilt. And so all the characters are kind of trying to get what they want out of each other. And then something horrible will happen. Actually, 2 horrible things will happen, because you get 2 rolls off that table. And so then we know that in the second half of the story, there's going to be something precious on fire, or there's going to be, an animal let loose, or, any of those other things. There's 6 categories and 6 things in each category, and they can be interpreted very broadly. So then we will do 2 more rounds, and in the second half, this is when it really starts to get crazy and chaotic, and people can die, and all kinds of stuff can go on. And the whole time, again, you're not rolling dice to resolve conflicts. You're not doing any of that. You're just collaboratively telling the story. And your goal is not to win or not to survive. Your goal is to tell a really cool story. And of course, your goal is to try to get what you want and as many of the same colored dice as you can. So then you get to the end where all the dice have been distributed. You've gone around, 2 times before the tilt, 2 times after the tilt. And by then, probably absolute chaos and horror has broken out at some point. The jealous husband is trying to kill the wife who's having an affair, and the wife and her lover are trying to run off together, and the plumber is maybe holding them all hostage because he's trying to get money for his dealer, and the dealer has a relationship with somebody else, possibly with the spouse, or maybe if there's 4 players, then that dealer is the other woman that the wife is having an affair with. You never know how it's going to end. And you get to the end and you have the aftermath. And in the aftermath, everybody's going to roll all their dice that they have collected over the course of the game. Okay? You roll all your dice, and I've got my little bookmark in here. And you subtract the low number from the high number. So like if you roll your dice and you have 3 black dice and 1 white dice, and the 3 black dice show a total of 10, and the one white die shows a total of 4, then you subtract that low number from the high number and you end up with 6 black. So then you look here on the aftermath table and 6 black says pathetic. You'll suffer. And then it goes on like that. And the lower the number is, the worst thing in the universe. And the higher the number is, something awesome can happen to you. Because maybe you get out of this scot-free, which is why you're going to want to try to collect as much of one number, as one color of dice as possible. So then during the aftermath, once you have defined what your ending is going to be like, so I've just rolled and I got that pathetic. So then one by one, you take the dice that you have, and each dice is a single sentence that you can say. And you'll take that dice out of your pool and you'll set it back in the middle, again taking turns, and say, this is me going to jail for drug trafficking. And then when it comes around to your turn again, this is me getting beaten in jail or escaping from jail or whatever it is that you want to do. This is me getting a job as a plumber in jail and using that to escape. One sentence that you get, and kind of leading towards that pathetic ending or the horrible ending or the awesome ending or whatever it is that you rolled. And this is a chance to have kind of a denouement, falling action, thing at the end to wrap up the whole story. That's how you play Fiasco. I have played Fiasco so many times at conventions, at home. I've played it with my kids. I've played it with strangers at shows. I teach writing conventions. I actually run a writing convention every year. And I will bring Fiasco to every writing conference that I go to, bar none, because writers in particular love this game. Because it's this really great storytelling game. Things can go so horrifically wrong in such entertaining and wonderful ways that it just is a lot of fun. And that I showed you is just the main default scenario, that main street. The main book, it's this little book, comes with 3 others: Boomtown, Suburbia, and The Ice, which is kind of an Arctic station, The Thing kind of scenario. I love the basic scenario because it is all pure storytelling. You don't need the extra elements like fantasy or science fiction in order to make it compelling, because you already have a bunch of characters who desperately want something and are willing to go to any lengths to get it. That it can be very entertaining all on its own. That said, there are a bunch, and I've got several other books that have a ton of other scenarios in them, and these can be all sorts of interesting things. One of my favorite ones that I have run probably more than any of the others is called The Zoo, in which the characters are either employees at the zoo, owners of the zoo, animal rights activists who go to the zoo, veterinarians who are working in conjunction with the zoo. All of these different things are working together as the zoo is running out of funding and people are either trying to shut it down or save it or, murder somebody else. There's fantasy scenarios. There's historical scenarios. There's one that's going all the way back to like 1500s England. There's one that is just kind of Washington, D.C. in the 70s. There's one focused around Texas during the Kennedy assassination. There's one that I did a couple years ago at a con and really loved, which was a submarine in World War II that has encountered some kind of eldritch horror in the North Sea. There's just so many different scenarios. There's a moon colony. There's one that's all about nut farming. There's one that is kind of like a faux D&D. I ran a game of this at Gen Con a few years ago that's like a D&D scenario where you're all doing that. You can even, it's relatively easy to put together your own scenarios. And so I built one around a Renaissance fair. I've built a scenario around behind the scenes of a Star Trek style science fiction show. And also there's an app you can get and I do believe it's a paid app. I've had it for so long I don't actually remember, but it's like $3 if they charge you for it. And that app includes a ton of other scenarios and playsets. Now, this is all talking about first edition Fiasco. Last year they kickstarted a second edition, which was scheduled to come out in spring of this year. To my knowledge, it is not out yet. I assume that the quarantine and the pandemic has slowed it down. Of course, by the time you watch this, I don't know, maybe it will be out. I have not played the second edition, but what they've done with the second edition is they've taken all the dice away and added a bunch of cards. And the plus side to that is that it is a lot easier, a little more intuitive to say, to define those needs and relationships and stuff like that. On the downside, you need a different set of cards for every scenario you play. So second edition will be a little smoother to teach new people, but it will not be as valuable to longtime players who want to try something new, because you will need an outlay of cash for every single playset that you play because of the way that the decks work. So it has its pros and cons. I am probably going to pick it up regardless because, like I said, it's one of my favorite games. It is hilarious. It is chaotic. It is fast playing and fun. You will get to see which of your friends are depraved and which of your friends can come up with the most horrible things to do to each other. It's just an absolute ball to play. So Fiasco, one of the most brilliant, perfect role-playing games I have ever seen in my life. Definitely check this out. The core book is like 15 or 20 bucks, and it's got, endless replayability. So there you go. My name is Dan Wells. You are awesome, and I'll see you later.